Chris Jericho was defeated on AEW Dynamite. Winter is coming by Action Andretti last night in one of the biggest upsets in All Elite Wrestling history. But how far back was the match, was the moment, was the upset planned? We've got the very latest details on the match, its outcome, and if it was a spur of the moment thing. Speaking of Winter is coming, MJF retains his AEW World Championship as well as retaining the Dynamite Diamond Ring against Ricky Starks, but he was confronted after the match by Brian Danielson. The Elite versus Death Triangle. The Elite are miles behind after losing last night once again 3-1 down against Death Triangle. I've got the very latest details on the stipulations for the remaining matches in the best of 7 series. What's the backstage morale currently like in AEW? You've got details on the backstage atmosphere. Kota Ibushi, is he about to become All Elite? Got the details on his possible signing with AEW. Jungle Boy and Hook seemingly form a new tag team last night on Dynamite. We've got a Women's World title match announced for next week's Holiday Bash edition of Dynamite. And what's the latest for Jeff Hardy in AEW? Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling, especially after last night's AEW Dynamite. Winter is coming, and maybe the biggest story coming out of the night was one of the biggest shocks, if not the biggest shock in AEW history, when Action Andretti defeated Chris Jericho. Now, when thinking of some of the most beloved AEW stars, many names come to mind. The Elite, Brian Danielson, Jon Moxley, Ricky Starks, Orange Cassidy, just to name a few. Well, now we have a new hero for the AEW fans. Meet Action Andretti. Andretti was the opponent for former Ring of Honor World Champion Chris Jericho on last night's edition of AEW Dynamite Winter is Coming. Now, Andretti at the time, I stress at the time, well, actually technically he probably was, but at the time, not officially, he was not officially a full-time AEW wrestler. So obviously him wrestling the former 8-time world champion was supposed to be a simple squash match, a squash victory against a jobber for the Ocho, but it was not meant to be. As Andretti kicked out of the code breaker heading into a commercial break, in the end, Andretti scored the biggest upset in AEW history, pinning Chris Jericho to score the upset. After the match itself, Tony Khan tweeted that Andretti had officially signed with AEW. The crowd was going crazy. The crowd was absolutely going nuts. Andretti became seemingly this generation's version of the 1-2-3 Kid when he scored the most shocking victory in AEW history on Dynamite Winter is Coming. Andretti scored the shocking victory over the former Ring of Honor World Champion, hitting a standing shooting star press for the win. As soon as Andretti had scored the win, Tony Khan took to Twitter to announce he was officially All Elite, saying, quote, "Congratulations, it's official. Action Andretti is All Elite." And certainly it had social media, the crowd, fans buzzing alight. What happened? It was insane. It was nuts. Jericho described the match as a tune-up earlier on and ended up in what Excalibur described as the upset of the decade, defeating the Ocho. Now, the independent wrestling star showed off impressive offense throughout the match. He most recently appeared for MCW Wrestling, formerly Maryland Championship Wrestling. He's a 24-year-old high flyer from Philadelphia. He's been wrestling since 2019 and billed as the sight to see. Andretti is a homegrown MCW wrestling star attending the MCW Pro Wrestling Training School. He recently appeared on AEW Dark, where he lost against QT Marshall and later pledged he would be back for another match in AEW. In total, he's had 5 AEW matches, including last night against Jericho, but prior to that, all 4 were losses on Dark Elevation or just Dark alone. He's also wrestled for numerous multiple promotions such as GCW, CZW, and Wrestle Pro, but as I mentioned, Tony Khan, after the victory, has actually signed him to a full-time contract. Now, according to Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select, Andretti had actually been under an AEW agreement since October. It's unknown whether it was a full-time one or if that's just confirmed after last night's show or anything like that. Andretti himself has responded and reacted to this incredible victory for himself, posting on Twitter, quote, "I really just pinned one of the best ever to do this. Follow your dreams and don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't." And then also in response to Tony Khan's All Elite announcement, announcement, specifically writing, quote, "Thank you, Tony Khan. Stoked to be a part of the great team here in AEW. Certainly a shocking, incredible upset." Now, the AEW Twitter account also then uploaded a video of a backstage interview between Renee Paquette and Action Andretti following the unexpected victory, saying, quote, "Words cannot describe how I feel right now. I just went out there and beat, like you said, the former AEW World Heavyweight Champion, an 8-time World Champion at that. I'm pretty new to this game, but that's pretty damn good for a rookie if you ask me. And if I can do that out there against a guy like Chris Jericho, well then, Renee, I think there's no telling the rest of the things that I can do here in AEW." Now, this led to a lot of speculation. Of, was this planned ahead of time? Was there a botch? Was it just a case of Chris Jericho having the clout and the power that he has in AEW and listening to the reaction of those in attendance last night going, "I've got to lose. I've got to call an audible. I've got to do something. I'm going to put this kid over," because as the match was going on, and actually in the early stages of the match, the crowd was going wild. They were cheering. They didn't know his name. They were just cheering for the jobber. And that's because of what Jericho had said earlier on in his backstage interview. And some people speculated, did Jericho just decide, yeah, I was meant to beat him, but I heard what was going on and I thought, I've got to lose. I've got to do it. Now, that isn't the case. As is the case for a lot of things in pro wrestling, this was heavily planned ahead of time. Now, on the latest Wrestling Observer radio show, Dave Meltzer has revealed how the match came together, saying, quote, "The story behind this is that Action Andretti had a match on one of the streaming shows against QT Marshall," Meltzer said. "Chris Jericho was watching the match and decided at that moment that this guy's going to be a star. So he decided he was going to make him a star. Once that happened, Jericho and presumably AEW president and head of creative Tony Khan began putting together the match and the plan for the match once Jericho finished his feud with Claudio Castagnoli. That rivalry culminated this past Saturday at Ring of Honor's Final Battle pay-per-view when Jericho lost the Ring of Honor World Championship to Castagnoli by tapping out to Castagnoli's giant swing. As I mentioned, it would appear that this was always the plan ahead of time and Jericho was already planting the seeds when it goes to the backstage interview, and it just worked. It got over maybe even more than they had previously planned. It would also appear that Jericho's next opponent and next rivalry is going to be Ricky Starks. He did name drop Starks by name during the aforementioned backstage interview where he talked about facing the jobber this evening, so it would appear that Jericho is going to face off against Starks at some point, or that's going to be the next feud for Jericho. And it was the best thing on the show. I mean, it was a really good. Dynamite was really good last night. It was. It felt like a more older version of Dynamite, more akin to the earlier days of the show on TNT, which was positive, and that felt like a Dynamite crowd. You know, a crowd that was red hot, and it worked. I think you have to give a lot of credit to Jericho because initially my reaction was that had to be improvised. That had to be Jericho just listening to the crowd and going, the guy's getting over, communicating with the referee saying, I've got to put him over. Shall I put him over? Tony Khan going, yeah, put him over. It wasn't. The fact that it was pre-planned ahead of time, significantly by weeks, I think goes to even more. You have to credit them even more because the execution was flawless there. If you knew a couple of weeks prior, I want to put over Action Andretti in a couple of weeks. How do I get this crowd behind him? I call him a jobber, and I don't think they probably expected the crowd to react just that well. Because even prior to, the way the match was set out was just perfect. Jericho dominates, and Andretti just gradually got more into it. And the more offense he did, when it got to the point towards the end, the crowd was going wild. And it is, I don't like to say it lightly because we've seen, big upset victories in wrestling history since the 1-2-3 kid. There have been a few, certainly. You could go back to, for instance, you could say Santino Marella when he won the Intercontinental Championship on his very first night against Umaga in Milan, Italy in 2007 on Raw, right? Stuff they've tried it, certainly, before. But this was the one that really did feel, I don't know, it just felt organic. And it was just really well done. And I think, again, the fact that it was heavily pre-planned, I think is a credit to Jericho and a credit to Tony Khan and AEW. And Action Andretti, the finish was actually slightly botched. They tried to, I think, do a kind of tornado DDT style thing, and it didn't really work out. And then he hit the running shooting star for the win, but the crowd went nuts, and it certainly put this guy in a spotlight. It's now upon him to run with this opportunity that he's been given. It's going to be interesting to see if Jericho's faith is going to be rewarded in Action Andretti, because what a way to make someone in the first evening. As far as what's going on with Jericho, I think they're going to do a storyline of things collapsing for him, right? He looked frustrated after the match. They did a thing backstage where he was calling himself the Ocho. I think the Jericho Appreciation Society needs to end. I hope it's a case of Jericho, getting to the lowest of lows and saying he doesn't need anyone anymore, and then feuding with Ricky Starks on his own. Jericho, throughout the entirety of his AEW tenure, has had a stable, has had a faction, whether it's the Inner Circle, whether it's the Jericho Appreciation Society. He needs to do something different now, and hopefully that's being solo and guess feuding with Ricky Starks as well. So certainly that's fascinating to see. Speaking of, winter is coming. It was main evented with an AEW/Dynamite Diamond Ring match between MJF and Ricky Starks. While MJF was ultimately able to defeat Starks to retain his AEW World title and his beloved Triple B bout, that's the Big Burberry bout, the night didn't end smoothly. While attempting to exit the ramp after his victory, MJF was confronted by a returning star, that being Brian Danielson, who emerged through the heel tunnel, as many fans noticed, to stare down MJF, who wasted no time before fleeing the scene. While MJF scurried up the arena stairs and narrowly escaped assault by Danielson, once with the safety of an arena between them, held up his AEW title in an apparent acceptance of Danielson, or possibly just triumph. We'll have to wait and see. I think that clearly we're going to be seeing MJF versus Brian Danielson at Revolution as the next AEW World Championship match, it would appear. The only thing I would say is kind of difficult for this one is that the story being told is that Danielson wants revenge because MJF took out William Regal in storyline, hit him with the brass knucks. Fine. But at the same time, AEW has a smart audience that knows what's going on. And how difficult is it going to be to sell the idea that Danielson's trying to get revenge for a William Regal, where in reality the entire audience knows it's because Regal's no longer with the company because he's going back to WWE. And by the time they have that match at Revolution, which is in March, remember, Regal would have been back with WWE for 3 months by that point. He starts with the company on the first week of January. So by that point, is the issue still about William Regal, or is there something else? I mean, there's a lot of time between now and then too that maybe they do go in a different route when it comes to the storyline. I don't know. So that would be my only sort of critique with this one. But clearly, we're going towards Danielson versus MJF, which isn't a bad thing whatsoever. Last night, we also saw Death Triangle go 3-1 up in the Best of 7 series. The show kicked off with match 4 of the Best of 7 series between the Elite and Death Triangle. The inaugural Trios champions entered the match with a 2-1 disadvantage, with them losing the first 2 matches to Death Triangle before scoring their first victory in the series on November 30. The Elite, though, had an immediate disadvantage when Nick Jackson was escorted to the back after suffering an injury. This was all kayfabe, of course. Matt Jackson and Kenny Omega fought the match at the numbers disadvantage for some time before Nick returned to the match. However, Nick's injury ultimately led to his downfall, with Phoenix submitting him to an ankle lock to extend Death Triangle's lead to 3-1. The 5th match of the series will take place on next week's episode of Dynamite, and after a Kenny Omega unscripted promo, as you said, it wasn't the format for my promo to take place here. It will now be a no disqualification match, and it's not the only stipulation that's been added to the remainder of the Best of 7 series matches. As I mentioned, last night's match ended with Rey Fenix submitting Nick Jackson, extending the lead to 3-1 to Death Triangle. Well, it turns out the stipulations don't just stop at next week's show. Next week's match, as I mentioned, will be a no disqualification match, but different stipulations have been added to matches 6 and 7 should they be required. They will be, but should they be required, we have matches stipulations announced for that. The potential match number 6 will be a Falls Count Anywhere match, while the potential 7th and final bout will be a ladder match, or as they say on commentary, Escalera de la Muerte, which is obviously ladder of death. It's going to be a ladder match. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be a ladder match. Now, the 6th match will take place on December 28th at the New Year's Smash event, and the 7th is going to take place on January 11th in Los Angeles at the Kia Forum in that massive show for AEW, which of of course, is also going to have Saraya wrestling with her mystery partner that a lot of people are assuming is going to be a debuting Mercedes Varnado. It's the week after Wrestle Kingdom 17 as well, which of course Kenny Omega will be at, which is why there's no match on January 4th on that edition of AEW Dynamite as well. So certainly we're going to, this best of 7 series is really building up. What we're going to see is the Elite, I think, win the next 3 matches. We're going to see them win next week. We'll see them win the week after as well in Denver at New Year's Smash, and I think they win that ladder match in LA. And they're being smart, AEW. They're really building up that LA show. We know that the Warner Bros. Discovery executives are going to be in the house once again for that show, as they were earlier this year. And again, we're going to have some real big stuff happen on that show, I think. And one is going to be this huge ladder match, which is going to see the Elite once again become Trios World Champions. I think that's the direction that they're going in. But certainly at the moment, you know, you could argue the Death Triangle are looking great coming out of this, but the Elite now are going to go on this hot streak and I think win back the championships. What's the backstage morale like in AEW at the moment? Of course, it's been a tumultuous year for the young promotion and a lot of backstage conflict, a lot of controversies, and a lot of points where people were pretty upset with what was going on in the company. In September, ongoing backstage friction within the company boiled over as former AEW World Champion CM Punk let loose during the post-all-out media scrum in which he called out several prominent AEW figures, including company EVPs, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega, as well as Hangman Adam Page. Right after, Punk found himself in a physical altercation with Omega and the Bucks, after which all those involved were suspended. The Elite have since returned to television. Punk has not, but he's still injured as well. Other incidents have also occurred this year, including altercations between Andrade El Idolo and Sammy Guevara. Another incident involved Eddie Kingston and Sammy Guevara. There's also been rumors of unrest in the women's division with Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker. Well, according to a new report from Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select, despite the drama of the past 12 months, several members of the AEW locker room have had positive things to say about the morale and direction of the company's backstage environment as of late. Hopefully this will signal a more positive start as the company heads into the new year. It would appear, certainly, that the controversies backstage in AEW have limited somewhat over the last few weeks. And I mean, again, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be backstage drama in any company. It just got out of control in AEW, and I think they have done a good job in kind of managing it and sustaining it once again and calming things down. But you do question how much damage was done as a result of everything that's happened this year. I think the ratings reflect that a bit. I think that, you know, opinion about the company and opinion about certain stars has taken a massive hit. Perception has taken a hit this year because of that, and that's going to take longer to fix, in my opinion, than just a couple of weeks or months. Kota Ibushi, he's a name that's been linked with AEW recently. Former IWGP World Heavyweight Champion Kota Ibushi is finally starting to show some progress with his injured shoulder, which kept him out of action for well over a year. And he is set to end his acrimonious relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling in January, when his contract with the promotion finally expires. Ibushi's next move has long remained a riddle inside of a mystery wrapped inside of Enigma, despite his longtime tag team partner Kenny Omega being an EVP of All Elite Wrestling. But the Golden Star recently shed some light on his situation while speaking with Dan Perozu of Flosion, saying, quote, "My plan for the future is to have my own promotion and to do a lot of volunteering," Ibushi said. "There are really big offers from AEW and all over the world, but I would like to make a contribution rather than visiting nursing homes and so on. Of course, I am also thinking of giving back to professional wrestling. I'm so happy. So in 2023, I'm thinking of contributing to the world and giving back to professional wrestling. And above all, I want to liven up the world of professional wrestling. I'm also a player." While Ibushi seems to be closing the door on signing full-time with AEW, he has previously expressed interest in at least working a few matches with the promotion. He showed interest in wrestling former AEW World Champion Hangman Page. So I still think Ibushi will end up in AEW. It might be a case if he wants to do more. And maybe he'll want to set up his own promotion in Japan, or he'll want to do other things around the world. He mentioned volunteering and what have you, and maybe he'll still want to do that. I still think if he signs with AEW, he can do that. I mean, again, the AEW schedule is very light. And I don't know where he would want to be based. You would think he'd have to be based in the US for that. How would he do that in Japan? I'm not sure. So I would still keep an open mind when it comes to Kota Ibushi. One thing's for certain, though. He's not going to be with New Japan Pro Wrestling next year. Last night on Dynamite, Winter is Coming, we may have seen a new tag team be formed. Jungle Boy Jack Perry did not send for Hook, but he gained an ally in the cold-hearted Handsome Devil during AEW Dynamite Winter is Coming last night in Garland, Texas. Following his victory over Brian Cage, Perry referred to himself as a Giant Slayer for defeating Cage on Wednesday and Luchasaurus at Full Gear, and proceeded to call out Big Bill of the firm. This led to Stokely Hathaway warning Perry to tread carefully or be on the receiving end of a beatdown from Big Bill. Just as Perry charged towards Hathaway, Lee Moriarty and Big Bill ambushed him and dragged him into the ring to carry on a beatdown, but just then Hook came out to a loud ovation from fans at the Curtis Colwell Center. Big Bill and Moriarty would immediately retreat at the sight of Hook. The segment ended with Hook offering Perry a handshake, and Perry obliged as the two men nodded at each other, possibly signaling the start of a tag team or alliance. It was interesting because, look, the reaction to Hook, and it's as it still is, was great. And he got a huge pop from the crowd, and that tag team right there, Jungle Boy Jack Perry and Hook, people would love them, that tag team. They're two good-looking guys. They're young. They'd be huge. There's a license to print money for AEW. But I did and maybe this is just a little bit old-school pro wrestling in me and not being, lost in the moment, having that suspension of disbelief. But when Hook came down to the ring, I just thought to myself, why on earth would Big Bill, who is legitimately close to 7 feet tall, be concerned in the slightest with Hook coming down to the ring? Why would he run away? Why? Because Jungle Boy's down in the ring. It's 2 versus 2, and with Big Bill, it's really 2.5. And Stokely Hathaway's there. It's 3 versus 2. So I was a bit like, oh, okay. One of those pro wrestling things, right, where you have to just go, oh, sure. But, it's got a good pop, and there'll be a really over tag team, no doubt about it. Jamie Hayter is going to defend her AEW Women's World Championship for the first time next week against Hikaru Shida. AEW confirmed the title match via a promo segment last night on AEW Dynamite Winter is Coming, featuring interviews from both Hayter and Shida. During the promo, Shida reminded the world that she's the longest reigning AEW Women's World Champion in history. So we're going to get that title match next week, which of course Jamie Hayter is going to win. And also, I suppose beating a former champion gives her some not needed credibility, but a good way to start off her title reign. They're clearly building towards Hayter versus Britt Baker, because they keep doing the thing where Britt Baker keeps interrupting and talking over Hayter. So they're clearly building towards that. Maybe they'll do the turn after the Saraya Mystery Tag Team Partner match on January 11th. I think that's where they're going towards with that. Finally, what's the latest when it comes to Jeff Hardy? Well, it's been nearly 6 months since Jeff Hardy's latest arrest, but it appears a resolution may be in sight after several delays. PW Insider has provided an update confirming that Hardy's pre-trial hearing is still set to take place on Wednesday, December 21st at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Hardy will be required to attend the hearing in person. Of course, Hardy was arrested in June on felony charges of DUI, his third offence in 10 years, as well as misdemeanor charges of driving while license was cancelled / suspended / revoked, and a violation of restrictions placed on a driver's license. An original pre-trial hearing was scheduled for July, but Hardy's attorneys had it pushed back 60 days by waiving his right to a speedy trial. In October, the same attorneys motioned that they recently provided extensive mitigation materials to the counsel for the state, and that the parties require additional time to negotiate a potential pre-trial resolution. If a plea deal is achieved, a trial will ultimately become unnecessary. Hardy is pleading not guilty as originally filed with the court. Hardy's history of drug and alcohol abuse is well documented. This arrest in Florida comes after 2 DUI-related offences in North Carolina, as well as an incident in the summer of 2019 when Hardy was arrested and charged with public intoxication and impairment in South Carolina. In 2011, infamously, Hardy's issues led to an incident at TNA's Victory Road pay-per-view when the charismatic Enigma was booked to wrestle Sting for the TNA World Championship. Hardy was behaving oddly and was visibly dazed during his entrance to the ring, forcing TNA executive producer Eric Bischoff to call an audible and go straight to the finish. This was, of course, during a period of time as well which Hardy was actually undergoing or in the middle of legal issues for a prior arrest in 2009, just after he left WWE. So, look, here's hoping that we do get a resolution next week. There's some kind of plea deal, because if he pleads not guilty, he is, you want to judge people, but the evidence is there. And the most important thing is that he gets the help that he needs. By all accounts, it's been put out there that he's in rehabilitation, and that's the only way back for him to come to AEW. So obviously, if we get more details on it, we'll let you know here on the channel. But there you go, guys. It's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. And let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.